I thought the garden was just for my roses. But tonight my shovel hit something that sounded like a casket. 3 hours ago, my only son stood in my kitchen and demanded I sell this house for $400,000. He said it was for my own good. But looking at the rusted metal box I just pulled from the earth, I realized the soil did not hide roots. It was hiding the reason my husband died 15 years ago. My name is Margaret Holloway. At 56 years old, I have learned that the silence of an empty house is heavy, but it is honest. Here in Silver Creek, the Midwest winters strip the trees bare, leaving nothing to hide behind. And I felt that same exposure today when my son sat across from me at the kitchen table. This house is all I have left. It is a modest 2-story craftsman with a porch that needs painting, but it is paid for. It was the only thing Frank left me when he died 15 years ago. They called it an industrial accident, a slip, a fall, a closed casket. The settlement money was barely enough to cover the funeral and the mortgage, but I held on to this place with a grip that made my knuckles white. It was not just wood and siding. It was the only place where I could still smell Frank's tobacco smoke in the drapes. My son, Daniel, did not see it that way. He sat there in a suit that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, tapping a gold pen against a glossy brochure. He had driven down from the city in a car that purred too quietly. He looked like my Danny, but his eyes were different. They were calculating, scanning the room not for memories, but for square footage and market value. "Mum, you have to look at the numbers," Daniel said, sliding a paper toward me. "The market in Silver Creek is peaking. We could list this place for $380,000 by Monday. I have an associate who can waive the inspection." I looked at the paper without reading it. The numbers meant nothing to me. "This is my home." "Daniel," I said softly, "your father and I bought this place 3 months before you were born. Why would I want to sell it?" Daniel sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience that made my stomach turn. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. Because you are sitting on dead capital." "Mum," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt rehearsed. "I have an opportunity, a development project. It is a guaranteed return of 20% in 6 months. But I need liquidity. I need you to liquidize this asset so we can secure your future." I stared at him. He was not talking about my future. He was talking about his. I looked out the window at the backyard. The oak tree Frank planted was shedding its leaves, covering the patch of earth near the tool shed. The garden was my sanctuary. It was where I buried my grief, layer by layer, year after year. "I am not an asset, Daniel," I replied, my voice steadying. "And neither is this house. I am not going to sell. I have enough pension to live on. I do not need a 20% return." Daniel stopped tapping the pen. The air in the kitchen shifted. The warmth of the afternoon sun seemed to vanish. He stood up slowly, smoothing his jacket. "You are being selfish," he said coldly. "I am trying to build a legacy here, and you are letting this place rot around you." I said no, I stated, reaching for my tea mug to hide the trembling in my hands. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, sharp sound. He picked up his briefcase and walked to the door, stopping with his hand on the latch. "You know, there are laws about this, Mum," he said, not looking back at me. "If an elderly parent is unable to manage their assets properly, the court can appoint a guardian, a conservator. My heart hammered against my ribs. Are you threatening me? I am just saying. He paused, turning his head slightly so I could see his profile, sharp and unyielding. I am just saying that I will do what is necessary to protect this family's interests, even if you are too stubborn to see it. He slammed the door. The sound echoed through the hallway, shaking the picture frames on the wall. I watched from the window as his car sped away, disappearing down the street. The house was silent again, but the safety I had felt for 15 years was gone. The shadows in the corners seemed longer, darker. I looked back at the garden, at the roses and the disturbed earth near the fence. I realized then that my son was not just a greedy man, he was desperate. And a desperate man is capable of anything. 3 days after our argument in the kitchen, the sound of gravel crunching in the driveway broke the morning silence. I looked out the window to see Daniel's car, followed closely by a black sedan. He did not come alone this time. 2 strangers stepped out into the grey light of the morning. One was a man with a briefcase who looked like he charged by the minute, and the other was a woman with sharp features and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. When I opened the door, Daniel did not even say hello. He walked past me, ushering the others into my living room as if he already owned the place. Mom, this is Mr. Sterling, a property attorney, Daniel said, his voice tight and breathless. And this is Ms. Reeves. She is my financial partner in the development project. Ms. Reeves did not smile. She scanned my living room, her eyes lingering on the antique clock Frank had repaired the year before he died. It felt like she was pricing it. Mrs. Holloway, the lawyer began, opening his briefcase on my coffee table without asking. We are here because a serious issue has come to light regarding the deed to this property. It concerns your late husband. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. My husband has been dead for 15 years. The deed is in my name. I paid the mortgage off 4 years ago. It is not about the mortgage. Daniel cut in, pacing near the fireplace. It is about an old lien, a liability claim from the construction company Dad worked for. They are saying the land was part of a collateral agreement he signed in 1998. I stared at him. Your father never signed anything he did not read, and he never put this house up for anything. Mr. Sterling slid a thick document across the table. It was full of dense legal jargon, but the title at the top was clear enough: power of attorney. If the state seizes the property to satisfy the lien, you will get nothing, the lawyer said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. But if you sign this power of attorney, Daniel can transfer the title into a holding trust. We can liquidate the asset before the lien attaches. We can save your equity. It is the only way. I looked at the paper, then at my son. He was sweating, despite the chill in the room. I worked as a case manager at Willow Ridge Community Services for 20 years. Daniel, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I know how to read a legal notice. If there was a lien, I would have received a certified letter from the county clerk, not a visit from your friends. Daniel stopped pacing. He turned to me, and for a second, his mask slipped. I saw panic. The county is backed up for months. Mum, he shouted, making me flinch. I checked the records at the recorder's office myself. File number 774B. The encumbrance is there. Do you want to lose everything because you are too proud to let me help you? I froze. File number 774B. How did he know the specific filing code? Daniel was an architect, not a title officer, and he had never shown an interest in paperwork in his life. You seem to know a lot about the county records for someone who just wants to protect his mother, I said quietly. Ms. Reeves stepped forward then. She placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture that looked more like a restraint than a comfort. Margaret, she said, her voice raspy and deep. Daniel is trying to be a good son. The market is volatile. Legal issues like this. They can destroy a legacy. We are just trying to make sure you are comfortable. I stood up. The air in the room felt thin, insufficient for my lungs. I am not signing anything, I said. Get out of my house. Mum. Daniel started, taking a step toward me. I said, Get out. I screamed. They left. But the threat lingered in the air like smoke. As their cars pulled away, I walked to the front window. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor of 30 years, was checking her mail. I raised my hand to wave, desperate for a friendly connection. But she saw me and immediately looked down, hurrying back into her house. My heart sank. Daniel had been talking to them. He had been planting seeds, telling them I was senile, perhaps, or incompetent. I was being isolated. I went to the kitchen and locked the back door, then the front. I checked the windows. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. Daniel knew about file codes. He had brought a woman who looked at me like I was an obstacle to be removed. And they had lied about Frank. Frank would never have risked our home, which meant the lie was covering something else. I realized then that the accident 15 years ago might not have been an accident at all. And my son was not just greedy. He was involved. I was not safe in my own home anymore. I was being hunted, and the walls were closing in. The house felt too large after they left. The silence was not peaceful anymore. It was heavy, filled with the echoes of the accusations my son had hurled at me. I sat in the living room chair, the one Frank used to claim as his throne, and let the darkness settle around me. My mind drifted back, past the angry face of my son, past the last 15 years of widowhood, landing softly on the early days of my marriage. We were so young then. Silver Creek was different in the late 90s, smaller and quieter. Frank had been a foreman for a construction company that won the bid for the municipal water expansion project. It was a massive job, one that kept him out late and made him quiet at the dinner table. I remembered how his hands used to shake when he poured his coffee in the mornings. I had thought it was just fatigue, the toll of hard labor. But looking back now, I recognized the vibration of fear. One night, about 6 months before the accident, Frank had come home covered in mud, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He had grabbed my shoulders, his grip tight enough to bruise. Maggie, listen to me, he had whispered, checking the windows as if the trees outside were listening. If anything happens, if things go sideways, you never sell this land. You keep the deed. You keep the dirt. Do you hear me? You are scaring me. Frank. I had replied, trying to pull away. What is going on at that site? He never answered. He just held me, smelling of wet earth and diesel. I remembered our last fight. It was the night before he died. The memory was sharp, slicing through the fog of time. We were in the kitchen. I was angry because he had missed dinner again. I cannot live like this. Frank, I had shouted, slamming a plate into the sink. You are a ghost in your own house. Daniel needs a father, not a shadow that creeps in at 2 a.m. I am doing this for Daniel. Frank had yelled back, his voice cracking. I am trying to ensure. I am trying to make sure we have a way out when the levee breaks. He had stormed out into the backyard. I did not follow him. I was too stubborn, too wrapped up in my own frustration. Instead, I watched him from the kitchen window. The porch light was off, but the moon was full enough for me to see his silhouette. He was kneeling by the old oak tree, near the patch of wild roses I had struggled to grow. He was digging. It was not a deep hole, just shallow enough to hide something. I saw the glint of metal in his hands. It looked like a small box, maybe a lockbox or a heavy tool case. He placed it in the ground and covered it quickly, smoothing the dirt over with his boot. When he came back inside, he washed his hands for 10 minutes, scrubbing until his skin was raw. We never spoke of it. The next day, he was dead. A chill ran down my spine as I sat in the dark living room. I realized something else, a detail I had pushed away for years because it made me uncomfortable. That night, after Frank came back inside, I had walked upstairs to check on Daniel. He was supposed to be asleep, but my son, 12 years old at the time, was not in his bed. He was sitting at the top of the stairs, hugging his knees to his chest. He was looking at the back door with an intensity that frightened me. He had heard everything. He had seen everything. "Danny," I had asked softly, "go to bed." "Honey, Dad is scared." "Mom," Daniel had said, his voice flat and devoid of childhood warmth. "He's scared of the men in the suits. Now, sitting in the same house 15 years later." The pieces clicked together with a sickening sound. Daniel knew. All these years, he had known his father buried something in the garden. His sudden interest in investing, his knowledge of the file codes. The pressure to sell it was not just greed. It was a retrieval mission. My son was not trying to build a future. He was trying to exhume the past. Guilt washed over me, cold and suffocating. I had failed Frank by ignoring his warnings. I had failed Daniel by letting him carry a secret that likely rotted him from the inside out. I stood up. My knees popped, protesting the movement. But my resolve was harder than the floorboards beneath my feet. I walked to the kitchen and looked out at the garden. The moonlight was hitting the same spot near the oak tree. The roses were overgrown now, wild and thorny, guarding the soil. "I am sorry, Frank," I whispered to the empty room. "I am so sorry I did not listen." I went to the utility closet and grabbed the heavy iron shovel. It was heavy in my hands, a tool of labor. But tonight it would be a tool of truth. I would not let Daniel or his sleek lawyer or that cold woman take this from me. If there was a secret in my backyard, I would be the one to bring it into the light. I unlocked the back door and stepped out into the cool night air. The wind was picking up, rustling the dry leaves, sounding like 1,000 whispering voices urging me to dig. The blade of my shovel sliced through the turf with a wet, tearing sound that seemed deafening in the stillness of the night. It was 2 a.m. My neighbors were asleep, safe in their beds, while I was out here in my nightgown and boots, waging war on the earth. My shoulders burned with every heave, the arthritis in my hands protesting the violence of the motion, but I could not stop. I was possessed by a need that felt less like curiosity and more like survival. I dug exactly where I had seen Frank kneeling 15 years ago. The soil here was different. Even after all this time, the layers felt inconsistent, as if the earth had never quite healed from the disturbance. I was about 3 feet down when the metal tip of my shovel struck something that did not yield. It was not a rock. The sound was hollow, a dull clang that vibrated up the wooden handle and into my bones. Please. I whispered to the darkness, my breath pluming in the cold air. Please tell me I am wrong. I dropped to my knees, clawing at the dirt with my gloved hands. I brushed away the soil until I exposed the corner of a box. It was an industrial lockbox, the kind Frank used to keep on his truck, rusted and caked in mud, but still intact. I dragged it out of the hole, grunting with the effort, and sat back on my heels, panting. I did not dare open it there. I hauled the heavy box into the kitchen, locking the back door behind me, under the harsh fluorescent light. The box looked like a coffin for secrets. I grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer and jammed it into the rusted mechanism. With a sharp crack, the latch gave way. I lifted the lid. The smell of mildew and old paper wafted out, hitting me with a wave of nausea. The first thing I saw was the money. Stacks of bills, wrapped in rubber bands that had long since snapped and rotted. It was mostly 50s and hundreds. I did not count it, but it had to be at least $50,000. Blood money. Beneath the cash lay a chaotic mess of papers, blueprints, invoices, and a small black notebook. I picked up the notebook, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. The handwriting was Frank's scrawled, hasty, terrified. I flipped to the last entry, dated 2 days before he died. They are squeezing me. I told them the foundation is unstable. They do not care. They said if I talk, they will go after the family. Then, my eyes caught a line at the bottom of the page that made my heart stop beating for a terrifying second. Daniel saw the man in the suit today. He asked me why the man gave me an envelope. I told him it was a bonus. I think he knows I am lying. I think he knows who they are. I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. Oh, Danny. I gasped. My son had not just overheard a conversation. He had seen the payoff. He had been a witness before he was even a teenager. Was that why he was so cold now? Had he been carrying this poison in his veins for 15 years? Or had he eventually decided to join the people who killed his father? I dug deeper into the box and found a cassette tape labeled Meeting with E. T. November 4th. I ran to the living room and dusted off the old stereo system Frank had bought in the 90s. I shoved the tape into the deck and pressed play. The hiss of static filled the room, followed by the sound of a door closing. You are making a mistake. Frank, a voice said. It was smooth, arrogant, and terrifyingly familiar. The project moves forward. The concrete pour is scheduled for Tuesday. The mixture is too thin. Frank's voice replied. He sounded small, cornered. It will crack within 5 years. People will get hurt. People get hurt every day. The other man said. But people who cooperate get rich. People who do not, well, they have accidents. Think about Margaret. Think about that boy of yours. I gripped the edge of the speaker, my knuckles white. I knew that voice. Everyone in Silver Creek knew that voice. It was Elias Thorne, the current mayor, the man whose campaign signs were planted on every lawn in town, including, I realized with a sick lurch of my stomach, the lawn of the woman who had come to my house with Daniel. You monster! I hissed at the machine. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was louder than the recording. I looked down at the box of evidence. This was not just a property dispute. My husband had been murdered to cover up a massive infrastructure fraud, and the man responsible was now running the town. And my son was working with them. I was not just a widow fighting for a house anymore. I was a witness, holding the weapon that could bring them all down. But as I looked at the dark windows, I realized that holding a weapon makes you a target, and the hunter was already inside the family. I sat at my kitchen table until the sun began to bleed through the curtains, casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum. The cassette tape had finished playing hours ago, but the silence it left behind was deafening. I had listened to the entire recording 3 times. Each time, the voice of Elias Thorne became clearer, sharper, stripping away 15 years of lies. My husband had not died because he was clumsy. He had been murdered because he refused to certify a load of defective concrete for the city dam project. The documents in the rusted box confirmed it all fake invoices, safety reports that Frank had refused to sign, and a terrifying memo from the construction company authorizing hostile measures against uncooperative employees. The most painful revelation, however, was not about the dead, but the living. I picked up the black notebook again. Frank had written that Daniel, at 12 years old, had seen the bribe money. He had seen the fear in his father's eyes. I realized with a sick, sinking feeling that my son had not just repressed that memory, he had weaponized it. Daniel had grown up knowing exactly who held the power in this town, and instead of fighting them, he had decided to join them. He was not asking me to sell the house for a return on investment. He was doing it because the existence of this house, and the land beneath it, was the only loose thread in a conspiracy that had made Elias Thorne a very rich man. I opened my laptop and typed the name Ms. Reeves into the search bar, followed by Silver Creek Development. Nothing came up. Then I typed Elias Thorne family. A campaign photo from 3 years ago filled the screen. There, standing next to the smiling mayor, was the woman who had sat on my sofa and looked at me with dead eyes. Her name was Vanessa Thorne. She was not a financial partner. She was the daughter of the man who ordered my husband's death. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the slat in the blinds. The grey sedan was still there, parked 2 houses down. It had not moved since yesterday. The man inside was just a silhouette. But I felt his gaze on my front door. They were watching me. They were waiting for me to break. Or perhaps they were waiting for me to try and leave with the box. That lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was not just an attorney. The documents in the box showed his signature on the fraudulent liability waivers from 15 years ago. He had been burying their secrets for decades. They were all in it together. The mayor, the lawyer, the daughter, and my son. A nest of vipers masquerading as pillars of the community. Panic threatened to rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Panic was for victims, and I was done being a victim. I needed a plan. If I ran to the police now, the evidence would disappear before I even filled out a report. Thorne owned the police chief. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the harmless, confused old woman they thought I was. I picked up the phone and dialed Daniel's number. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump, forcing a tremor into my hand. Hello. Daniel answered on the second ring. His voice was tight, guarded. Daniel? I said, letting a waver enter my voice. I have been thinking about what you said, about the court, about the conservatorship. Mum. His tone shifted instantly, becoming sharper, more attentive. Are you okay? I am tired. Danny. I lied, looking directly at the box of evidence on the table. I am so tired of fighting. The house. It is too big for me. The memories are too much. I think I think you're right. I should sell. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that felt heavy with relief and triumph. That is really sensible. Mom? Daniel said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I promise. This is for the best. We can handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger. Can you bring Mr. Sterling over tomorrow? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I want to get it over with. I want to sign the papers and just go somewhere quiet. Tomorrow is perfect, he said quickly. I will set it up. We will come at 10 in the morning. Just rest. Mom, everything is going to be fine. Okay, I whispered. I will see you then. I hung up the phone. The tremor in my hand vanished. I looked at the rusted box, then at the clock on the wall. I had 24 hours. I went to the closet and pulled out my old scanner. I was going to make copies of everything. Then I was going to make a call to the one person in the state who hated Elias Thorne as much as I did. My son thought he was coming tomorrow to claim his prize. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. The scanner hummed with a rhythmic, mechanical sound that seemed to mock the pounding of my heart. I spent the next 4 hours digitizing every scrap of paper from the rusted box. I took high-resolution photos of the invoices, the threatening notes, and the black notebook where Frank had signed his own death warrant. The cassette tape was trickier, but I managed to record the audio onto my phone, creating a digital backup that could be emailed in seconds. Once the digital fortress was built, I needed a soldier to defend it. I searched for a contact number I had saved years ago, a name Frank had mentioned once with a mix of fear and respect. Mark Vance. He was an investigative journalist for the State Tribune who had tried to investigate the dam project 5 years ago, but had been silenced by a lack of hard evidence. I dialed the number. He answered on the third ring. Vance speaking. A gruff voice said, "Mr. Vance, my name is Margaret Holloway," I said, keeping my voice low. My husband was Frank Holloway. I believe you asked him questions about the Silver Creek Dam 15 years ago. There was a long pause on the line. I remember. He told me to go to hell. He was scared. I replied. But he left something behind. I have the proof, Mr. Vance. I have the bribery logs, the structural reports, and a recording of Elias Thorne ordering an accident. I heard the sound of a chair scraping against a floor, as if he had suddenly sat up straight. "Where are you?" he asked urgently. "Come to my house tomorrow at 10 in the morning," I instructed. "Park 2 streets over. Do not come to the door until I text you. I am hosting a signing party, and I want you to be the surprise guest." After I hung up, I turned my attention to the physical evidence. I could not leave the box in the kitchen. If they decided to search the house before I signed, they would find it. I wrapped the documents in plastic freezer bags, sealing them tight. I marched down to the basement deep freezer, pushed aside the frozen turkeys and bags of corn, and buried the package at the very bottom, underneath a 10-pound block of ice I kept for coolers. It was the last place a man in a suit would look. The cassette tape went into the hollow battery compartment of an old radio in the garage. By the time I finished, the sun was setting. I made myself a cup of tea, not to drink, but to hold. I needed the warmth. Then, I called Daniel. "Hi, Mom," he answered, his tone wary. "Danny," I said, letting a pathetic, broken wobble enter my voice. I am so nervous about tomorrow." "There is nothing to be nervous about," he said, his voice softening into that condescending tone he used for children. "We are just signing papers. It will be over in 20 minutes. I know. But I want to make sure everyone is there." I stammered. "I found something else. In the garage. It looks like cash. Maybe $50,000 in old bills. I do not want it. It feels dirty. I want to sign it over to you and Ms. Reeves to pay for the trouble I caused." I heard his breath catch. The mention of $50,000 was the hook. Greed is a predictable beast. "Cash?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Well, yes, we can handle that. I will make sure Ms. Reeves and Mr. Sterling are there to witness the transfer. We want everything to be legal." "Good," I whispered. "Please, just make sure it is done right. I cannot take the stress anymore. We will take care of you." "Mum," he said. "See you at 10?" I hung up and stared at the reflection in the dark window. The frightened old woman voice was gone. My face was set in stone. I walked around my house, straightening the doilies, fluffing the pillows, and dusting the dining room table where the signing would take place. I was setting the stage for a massacre. They thought they were coming to pick the carcass of a helpless widow. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by a mother who had nothing left to lose but the truth. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of a held breath before the scream. The conference room at Mr. Sterling's office was colder than a meat locker. It was located in the newest glass building in downtown, a place that smelled of expensive leather and old lies. I sat at the long mahogany table, my hands folded over my purse. Across from me, Daniel was practically vibrating with excitement. He looked like a child on Christmas morning, if the presents under the tree were deeds to stolen property. "This is it." "Mom," Daniel said, sliding a heavy gold pen toward me. "Just 3 signatures. One for the deed, one for the power of attorney, and one for the transfer of the extra assets we discussed." He winked when he said extra assets, referring to the $50,000 I had lied about. Sitting next to him, Ms. Reeves Vanessa Thorne was checking her watch. She looked bored, as if destroying a family was just another item on her Tuesday agenda. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer who had buried my husband's murder for 15 years, tapped a stack of papers with a manicured finger. "Right here. Mrs. Holloway," Sterling said, his voice dripping with false syrup. "And then you are free of that burden." I picked up the pen. The metal was cold against my skin. I looked at Daniel. He was smiling, a triumphant, greedy smile that did not reach his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought I was the foolish old woman who dug in the garden for roses, not secrets. I lowered the pen to the paper, letting the tip hover just millimeters above the line. Then I stopped. "Wait," I said softly. "What is it?" Daniel asked, his smile faltering slightly. "Is your hand hurting again?" "No," I replied, looking up to meet his gaze. "I just want to check the final clause, the one about the liabilities. I want to make sure there are no loose ends." We went over this. "Margaret," Vanessa snapped, losing her composure. "The trust absorbs all liabilities. Just sign the damn paper." "I cannot do that," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "Not until my independent advisor reviews it." Daniel frowned. "Advisor? What advisor? You said you were coming alone." I turned my head toward the frosted glass door of the conference room. "You can come in now." "Mr. Vance." The door swung open. Mark Vance stepped inside, holding a thick file folder and a digital recorder. He looked older than I expected, but his eyes were sharp, hungry for the story he had been denied for a decade. "Who is this?" Sterling demanded, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. "This is a private legal proceeding." "I am not a lawyer," Mark said, tossing the file onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding until it hit Daniel's hand. "I am a journalist, and that file contains copies of every bribe, every structural forgery, and every threat your firm has issued since 1998. The room went dead silent. Daniel looked down at the file. The top page was a photocopy of the black notebook entry. Daniel saw the man in the suit today. "Mom?" Daniel whispered, his face draining of all color. "Mom?" "What did you do?" I dug. "Daniel," I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out my phone. I dug up the box your father hid, and I listened to the tape. I pressed play on the screen. The audio was clear, amplified by the silence of the room. Elias Thorne's voice filled the air, cold and arrogant. "People who do not cooperate well, they have accidents. Think about that boy of yours." Vanessa Thorne let out a strangled sound, like a dying animal. She lunged for the phone. "Turn it off. That is fake. That is illegal recording. Sit down." "Vanessa," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. The force of it startled even me. "It is over. I sent the original tape to the State Attorney General 3 hours ago. I sent the digital files to every news outlet in the Midwest." Daniel stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was not the puppet master. He was the puppet, and I had just cut his strings. "You knew." Daniel choked out, tears welling in his eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of terror. "You knew I was helping them. I hoped I was wrong," I said, my voice trembling for the first time. "I prayed every night that you were just greedy. But you are not greedy. Daniel, you are a coward. You helped the people who killed your father because you were too scared to fight them." "Mr. Sterling did not wait for the conversation to finish. He grabbed his briefcase and bolted for the door. "I am leaving," Sterling stammered, his composure shattered. I was just retained for counsel. I knew nothing about a murder." He yanked the door open, but he did not get far. 2 uniformed officers were standing in the hallway, their arms crossed. Behind them was the sheriff, not the local police chief Thorne owned, but the county sheriff. "Mr. Sterling," the sheriff said, stepping into the room. "We have a warrant for the seizure of all files related to the Silver Creek Dam project, and we have an arrest warrant for Ms. Thorne and Mr. Holloway for conspiracy to commit fraud." Vanessa screamed, a high, piercing sound that shattered the professional veneer of the office. She scrambled back against the window, looking for a way out that did not exist. "He made me do it," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Daniel. "It was his idea to trick the old woman. I just handled the money." Daniel did not move. He slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I looked at him, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces, but I did not reach out to comfort him. I had signed the papers in my mind the moment I heard that tape. I had signed away my son to save the truth. The sirens were wailing outside now, growing louder, a symphony of consequences finally arriving at our door. The sterile atmosphere of the law office dissolved into the chaotic noise of justice being served. It was a sound I had waited 15 years to hear, yet now that it was ringing in my ears, It felt less like a triumph and more like a funeral dirge. The sheriff stood in the center of the room, his voice booming over Vanessa Thorne's hysterical sobbing. He read the charges from a sheet of paper that shook slightly in his grip, listing crimes that would strip the Thorne family of every ounce of dignity they had hoarded for decades. Racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. I watched as the untouchable Vanessa Thorne was handcuffed. The metal cuffs bit into her wrists, a stark contrast to the diamond bracelet she wore. She was screaming about her father, about calling the governor, but the officers ignored her. The invincible shield of her last name had shattered the moment Mark Vance walked into the room with that file. Then, the room grew quiet as two officers approached Daniel. He was still sitting in the leather chair, staring at the table where the unsigned deed lay. He looked small. He looked like the 12-year-old boy who used to scrape his knees climbing the oak tree in the backyard. But he was not that boy anymore. He was a man who had sold his father's memory for a share of the profits. "Daniel Holloway," the officer said, his voice flat and professional. "Stand up and place your hands behind your back." Daniel blinked, as if waking from a dream. He looked at the officer, then at me. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Mom, tell them I was just trying to help you." I remained seated. My hands were folded in my lap, steady and cold. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud, accessory to grand larceny, and concealment of evidence in a homicide investigation." The officer continued, pulling Daniel roughly from the chair. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around my son's wrists was louder than a gunshot. It echoed in the hollow space of my chest. Daniel did not fight them. He slumped forward, the fight draining out of him as the reality of his choices crashed down. As they led him toward the door, he stopped. He dug his heels into the expensive carpet and turned his head to look at me. His face was wet with tears, his nose running, his perfect suit rumpled. "Mom, please," he cried out, his voice rising in panic. "I did not kill him, I just wanted us to be safe. They said they would hurt you if I did not help them." "Mom." "Say something." I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had protected from the world, the man who had looked me in the eye 3 days ago and threatened to put me in a home. I searched for pity in my heart, but I found only a vast, empty plain of ash. He had not done this to protect me. He had done it because it was easier to join the wolves than to stand with the sheep. I did not speak. I did not blink. I just watched him. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's face crumpled. He realized then that no lawyer, no lie, and no plea could bridge the gap he had created. "Get him out of here," the sheriff ordered. Daniel sobbed, a broken, guttural sound, as they dragged him into the hallway. The door closed, cutting off his cries. I was left alone in the room with Mark Vance and the sheriff. "Mrs. Holloway," the sheriff said gently, removing his hat. "We need to seal your property. The backyard is now an active crime scene. We need to exhume the rest of the evidence and bring in the forensics team to verify the soil samples against the construction reports from 15 years ago." "I understand," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "You cannot stay there tonight," he added. "We will put you up in a hotel until the initial search is complete." I nodded slowly and stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I walked out of that building with my head high. Outside, the world was moving on. Cars were driving by, People were rushing to lunch, oblivious that the foundation of their town had just collapsed. I had lost my son. I had lost the peace of my home. But as I stepped into the cold afternoon air, I felt the ghost of Frank Holloway standing beside me. The weight was gone. The truth was out. And the silence was finally mine. It has been 3 months since the flashing lights faded from my driveway, but the silence they left behind is louder than the sirens ever were. Silver Creek is a small town, and in a place like this, the truth does not set you free. It just marks you. I walked into the grocery store yesterday to buy milk, and the conversation in the aisle died the moment I turned the corner. Mrs. Gable, who used to wave at me every morning, suddenly found the nutrition label on a can of soup fascinating. They do not look at me and see a victim. They see the woman who sent her own son to a cage. I have not visited Daniel. The lawyer says he is being held at the county detention center, awaiting trial. He calls the house phone sometimes. I sit in the hallway and watch the red light blink, listening to the ring echo through the empty rooms. It is a cruelty. I know, but I cannot answer. I cannot hear his voice. It sounds too much like Frank's, but twisted into something I do not recognize. In the long, sleepless nights, I sit in the armchair and let the guilt eat at me. It is a slow, gnawing thing. I ask myself the question that haunts every mother who watches her child turn into a monster. Did I love him too much? Did I love him too little? Or was the rot always there, sleeping in his blood, waiting for the right season to bloom? I remember him as a boy, scraping his knees, crying for me to hold him. How do you reconcile that child with the man who looked me in the eye and tried to sell my life for a commission check? You did the right thing. Margaret. Mark Vance told me last week when he stopped by to check on me. We were standing on the porch, drinking coffee that tasted like ash. It does not feel like the right thing. Mark, I replied, looking out at the street. It feels like I cut off my own arm to save the rest of the body. He made his choice, Mark said gently. You just turned on the lights. Sometimes, I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to hold it together. Sometimes I think it was better in the dark. The house feels massive now. It is hollowed out, stripped of the false comfort I had clung to for 15 years. But the real devastation is in the backyard. The police forensic team did not use small shovels like I did. They brought in excavators. They turned my garden, my sanctuary, into a battlefield of churned brown earth. The roses are gone. The grass is gone. It is just a scar of mud and rock, stretching from the porch to the fence line. Everyone told me to sell. They said I should take the insurance settlement for the landscape damage and move to Florida, somewhere warm where nobody knows my name. But looking at that ugly, broken patch of dirt, I felt a stubborn fire light up in my chest. I went to the hardware store this morning. I bought 10 bags of topsoil, a new rake, and a box of wildflower seeds. I put on my old rubber boots and walked out into the mud. I started to rake. My shoulders ached, and the wind bit at my face. But I did not stop. I leveled the ground. I pulled out the rocks the police had left behind. I am 56 years old. I have lost my husband to murder and my son to greed. I am the pariah of Silver Creek. But as I scattered the seeds into the black earth, I felt a strange sense of ownership I had never felt before. This land does not belong to the memory of Frank. It does not belong to the bank, and it certainly does not belong to Daniel. It is mine. I will grow something new here. It will not be roses. Roses are too delicate. They need too much care. I am planting wildflowers, things that are tough, things that can survive the frost and the neglect. I stood there alone as the sun went down, my boots caked in mud, feeling the crushing weight of solitude settling on my shoulders. But I did not go inside. I stood my ground. The winter is coming, but I will be here when the spring breaks, and I will watch the flowers grow over the scars. The gavel struck the mahogany block with a sound that felt like a crack of thunder, signaling the end of the longest winter of my life. It took 6 weeks of testimony, hundreds of documents, and the tireless work of Mark Vance to dismantle the empire Elias Thorne had built on the bones of honest men. When the foreman of the jury read the verdict, the air in the courtroom seemed to shift, becoming lighter, as if the lies that had choked this town for decades were finally being exhaled. The conspiracy was laid bare for the world to see. The court records confirmed that Frank Holloway did not die by accident. He died because he was a man of integrity who refused to sign off on a death trap. The headline in the Sunday paper no longer questioned my husband's competence. It hailed his bravery. They finally cleared his name. After 15 years of silence, Frank was a hero again. With the conviction of the Thorne family, the fraudulent liens against my property were dissolved instantly. The house was returned to me, free and clear. The developers, the sharks, and the opportunists scattered like cockroaches exposed to the light. I received offers, of course. Strangers called, offering double the market value, thinking I would want to flee the scene of so much pain. They thought I would want to wash my hands of Silver Creek and disappear into a retirement community in Florida. They were wrong. I sat in Mr. Vance's office as he handed me the settlement check from the civil suit against the construction firm. It was for $2 million. It was more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. You can sell the house now. Margaret, Mark said gently, you can go anywhere you want. I am not going anywhere, I replied, staring at the check. If I leave, they win. If I leave, I am just a victim who got paid off. I am staying. I did not keep the money. I used it to establish the Frank Holloway Integrity Fund. It would pay for legal defense for whistleblowers in the construction industry. I wanted to make sure that the next time a man like Frank stood up to a corrupt giant, he would not have to stand alone. Then came the hardest day, the sentencing of Daniel Holloway. I sat in the back row. I needed the distance. When the judge asked Daniel if he had anything to say, my son stood up. He looked thin, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. He turned around, scanning the gallery until his eyes locked on mine. Mum. He choked out, his voice small and trembling. I am so sorry. I was just so scared. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I did not feel anger. I felt a profound, quiet pity. He was a man who had never learned that some things are more valuable than safety. 10 years, the judge announced, to be served in a federal correctional facility. I did not cry. I watched the bailiffs lead him away. He looked back one last time, but I did not wave. I simply nodded. A silent acknowledgement that justice, while necessary, is a blade that cuts both ways. I had saved the truth, but I had lost my son. It was a price I had to pay. That evening, I walked out into my backyard. The spring air was warm. The wildflowers I had planted over the scars of the excavation were beginning to bloom poppies, daisies, and bluebells pushing up through the soil where the evidence box had been buried. The garden was wild and chaotic, nothing like the manicured roses I used to tend. but it was alive. I walked to the tool shed and picked up the heavy iron shovel. It was familiar in my hands. I carried it to the center of the yard, right next to the young oak sapling I had planted to replace the old roots they tore up. I thrust the blade into the earth, but not to dig. I left it there, standing upright like a sentinel, a monument to the work that was finally done. I looked at the house, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was quiet. It was empty, but it was mine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of damp earth and new growth. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I had dug up the past, buried the lies, and planted the future. My work was finished. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Today, are you listening from a quiet garden in the UK, a busy city in the US, or somewhere else entirely? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Stay strong and always trust your instincts.